Hello everybody. We're looking at Edge Magazine issue number 7 from my complete collection of Edge Magazine. And today we're in April 1994. And now not further discussing the future of video games, but the future of interactive entertainment, which would be Edge's slogan for quite a couple of years, and they changed it. But about 5 years ago, they changed it back. So, what is today's issue about? On the right, we have talk about the Sega Saturn. But on the cover, we have a game called Scavenger 4, which I think was called Nova Storm in America. And it's a boring but beautiful on-rail shooter, just like half the covers of Edge Magazine back in the day. So, what does it say at the bottom? It says Scavenger 4 from Psygnosis. I think they're French. This CD game has Rebel Assault well and truly licked. So it's better than Rebel Assault, which wasn't that good to start with. This image was rendered for Edge in Alias Power Animated, running on a Silicon Graphics Indigo. So this image was specially made for Edge Magazine, kind of like some of the images for Nintendo Power were specially made by Rare around the same time using Silicon Graphic technology. Here we go. So looking carefully, we see ED written here. And the opening column is about, let's see, the lifeline of how long the current generation of consoles would be. Saying that the 8-bit generation was longer thanks to new technology pumped into the 8-bit systems like the Commodore 64. And 16-bit would do the same with the FX chip and the Sega CD. But what I think is funny about this column is they said, well, the next generation, the 32-bit generation, well, they'll last for a very long time because of all their power. Of course, we know that 95, 96 was the PlayStation 1 and Nintendo 64. And 5 years later, you had, respectively, the PlayStation 2 and GameCube and Xbox, which means that, technically speaking, the 32-bit generation lasted just as long as the 16-bit generation. If not shorter. The Mega Drive was released in 1988, I believe. So, a whole feature on Laserdisc. We'll get back to this later. And a very good article on how the PC works. Oh, so what's the cutting edge news of April 1994? We have images of Panzer Dragoon and Clockwork Knight, I think it's called. So at the time just called Action Game. Excuse me. Yeah, the Saturn was looking promising, but not as promising as the PlayStation. And I think there's some talk about the 32X, which didn't have a name at the time, but it would be mostly focused on the American industry because the Genesis was very popular in the United States. There's an arcade show, apparently the 50th already. And they feature Ridge Racer with 3 screens. Daytona, one of the best beat-em-ups ever made, Dungeons and Dragons by Capcom. And any other important titles at the bottom? I don't see any. So let's continue. Yeah, more arcade games, more of them not very interesting. Neo Geo games, of course. What's this? Oh. Yeah, Neo Geo. Some virtual reality going on here. Person with the helmet on. The 3DO is to be released in Japan, and they talk a little bit about how the market there is different. And talk about Japanese getting ready for 32-bit systems, a rather kind of funny article. Here's some talk about the Jaguar having problems not selling well in England. because not enough units had been shipped. And Jaguar sees this as a good thing, kind of like the Nintendo Switch not always selling out here at the moment in Europe, because there's more there's more demand than supply. Now here's a console I've never heard of before, and I couldn't find anything about it on the internet. It's called the TXE Multisystem, by a Taiwanese company called MSU. All new to me. It seems to be like some kind of fancy karaoke machine, but I couldn't find anything about this on the web. And they talk about some games being made, but it seemed to work on like a computer using an Intel chip. Renderware is a software program to make 3D on your computer at home, and here's some details on that. I think a lot of games were made with this. Make donuts. Silicon Graphics, the more expensive alternative to getting your computer graphics done. They held a show, and this kind of looks like Killer Instinct, but it's made by Wavefront. I don't know if Wavefront worked on Killer Instinct. I should have looked that up. So, some talk about Project Reality. I remember this image with Slippy the Frog being a Nintendo Power in late 1993 and being totally blown. My mind was blown. I was like, wow, the Nintendo 64, that's going to be awesome. It wasn't that awesome, though. Here's a lot of rumors, but none of them seem to be interesting. So let's continue. There's some kind of Star Trek game for the 3DO. And here are the letters. Still talk about the same things. Why do you not cover more CD32? Why do you cover so much 3DO? Here's a letter about the music. It's not gotten better or something. And yeah, the usual complaints about where are all the good games. So on to the previews. Here we have Daytona. Yes, and this is a alpha build, and if you look really closely, you'll notice that there's very little detail. I mean, I think Sonic would appear on this wall here. This is that one turn you actually have to brake on the first race. So the Hornet looks pretty much done. And, well, a lot of hype about this game, even though Ridge Racer was already finished. One of the more attractive things about Daytona is that you could race against each other, which was a lot of fun. Well, here we have Guardian, a game for the CD32, polygon shooter. I've never heard of it before, and didn't seem that very exciting. Here's an article on Electronic Arts, who at the time were mostly concerned about the 3DO, which makes sense because Trip Hawkins, the person who started the 3DO, used to be the boss of Electronic Arts, and at the time he was at the top of the world, especially in America. And they talk about Road Rash, but for some reason there are images of Ridge Racer here. So here's a real image of Road Rash, but it was a good game for the 3DO. And here's a Shockwave game. I don't remember if this was any good. And some realistic looking sport titles, which would all be fairly well implemented on the 3DO. Because Electronic Arts at the time loved making good sports games. So here's Elite Systems. You probably don't remember them. And they weren't that successful, if you asked me. I can only name one game they actually released, which would be Dirt Tracks FX for the Nintendo 64. No, for the Super Nintendo, which used the FX chip. A fairly good racing game for the Super Nintendo. They had this racing game, Power Slide, which was never released, unfortunately. And here are some images of another game, as far as I know, that have not been released. So, in case you're interested in this company, you can read about it in Edge magazine number 7. But, yeah, they talk about how companies have to focus more on gameplay than graphics. Another odd commercial for Bravo, which is like some kind of satellite company. And here's an even odder feature about Laserdisc. In 1994, you see this. You see these two different sizes. Laserdisc was about the size of a normal vinyl album. You have CD, and this is about some kind of console which would play laser CDs. It would play CDs. It would play Sega CD games and another system, I guess PC CD games, and but also Mega LD games, in which you see some. It looks like another on-rail shooter, and I don't know, but oh, this article is not interesting at all. Just false hopes. A lot of talk about the industry, but these people didn't had no idea what they were getting into. I mean, come on, Laserdisc. So here you have interactive media featuring pretty girls. Conspiracy is still being advertised, and it's a good click and carry adventure from 1992, but re-released for the CD32, I think. Or it was first for the Amiga, later for the PC. That's how it worked. And here's a very good article. What's wrong with the PC? This is basically a very technical article on how the Intel legacy, how the Intel chips works with the legacy of the personal computer, and a lot of problems are described. A lot of options. You have to understand the PC architecture comes from 1981 or 1982, and a lot of things were thought of back then, not realizing how computers would evolve. So a lot of problems are described, and all the chips are bashed. Here's a 286, 386, 486, and the Pentium. What I especially like is that they show the rivals. You have the Amiga, which is a smoother PC that basically does more for less, but not that much software. Kind of like the Apple Macintosh. The Power PC was still just getting started back in 1994, and this would become Apple's go-to chip in the late 90s. And I'm a big fan of the architecture. It's really powerful. It was basically made up by IBM, Apple, and Motorola to replace Intel's chips, and they unfortunately didn't make it all the way. But the architecture you find in PowerPC is comparable to the chip architecture you find in smartphones. And in case you haven't noticed, your smartphone does a lot of things with pretty good graphics without using much energy and not that many loading times, mainly due to ARM's fantastic architecture. And finally, PC rival number 3 is the Macintosh, which is, again, a better version of the Intel computer, but not that well supported. It's a good article there. You get to feed your brain with a CD. I have no idea what this is doing here. Oh, here, CD-ROM Today. I guess it's another magazine about CD-ROMs. You can watch Robin Williams and his movies on CD, I guess. Your manga. And we're now at the review section. Let's see how far we get. We have another minute to go. So this is fascinating. I don't know if you can read it, but they say, yeah, Ridge Racer doesn't count because it's arcade game and Doom. It only works if you have the top end PC. The Super Nintendo is lacking because of Mega Man X and Super Puyo Puyo, which are excellent games. Puyo Puyo wasn't released for the Super Nintendo yet, and it's just as good as Dr. Mario, if you ask me. And so, yeah, the best game this month is Scavenger 4, which is really just a really bad game. Come on. And they even have SimCity 2000. So this was an excellent month for reviews, but they're like, nah, not a very good month for video games. We're talking Doom, come on. One of the 3 most important games of the 90s. So yeah, that's Edge Magazine number 7, part 1. We'll see you at part number 2.